kindle this flame with love for mothers and foremothers, past, present, and future. We kindle this flame in celebration of community and all of its generations. And we kindle this flame with respect and support for the greater circle of life of which we are all a part. I attended a progressive Unitarian Universalist seminary. The major foundations of the curriculum included an acknowledgement of the complexity that exists within humanity, an expansion beyond binary black and white thinking, and a challenge to constantly attempt to expand our thinking beyond my own myopic perspectives. We are reminded that the hallmark versions of a concept like motherhood are the exception rather than the norm sometimes. And that for every person in the room that was fortunate enough to be raised in a family that provided all of the quote-unquote perfect experiences during our upbringing, there are likely many, many more whose relationships with one or more parents was challenging, to say the least. On this day that has been set aside to honor our mothers, the source of all of our lives, the source of every human that has ever walked the planet, I am guided to first and foremost consider those complexities. Some challenges we experienced with our mothers may have been warranted. Perhaps the person that gave birth to us was not prepared yet to be a mother. Perhaps your mother wrestled with mental illness. Perhaps she never had the opportunity to heal from the traumas that were inflicted upon her, and she was too focused on her own needs to properly attend to yours. And perhaps she left this plane long before you were prepared to let her go. But beyond the many real-life challenges each mother takes on and the responsibility of raising a child, many more challenges have been heaped upon those that have shouldered the burdens of raising a human by our society's foundational myths. We don't always think of the way things are through the lens of our society's shared myths because they are just baked into our assumption in ways that we rarely stop to explore. So this is the focus of my sharing today. Consider, if you will, a few of the characters and dramas central to the following stories. Many peoples natives to this land that we now inhabit would have been raised with some version of the Sky Woman tale I shared with our children's time this morning. A female heroine falls from the sky, partners with the creatures she finds in the sky and water, and then works collectively to create the land and to seed it with all the abundance that we benefit from today. Compare that with the dominant creation myth from our society, focused on the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. In this tale, a male god makes humans in his own image and gives them dominion over all of creation. Until, of course, Eve messes up. We could have had it all if only that weak Eve hadn't been so easily seduced by that snake and screwed it all up for all of us. Whether we were raised Christian or not, this tale is so deeply embedded into our collective psyche that it is impossible not to be influenced by its implied assumptions. Then consider, if you will, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Perfect in every way, pure and without sin. A completely unattainable model of perfection that mothers are held to, but that could surely never be attained by a mere mortal. Or even Mary Magdalene, who modern historians are now correctly redefining as a close follower of the prophet Jesus, or perhaps even his wife, whose actual contributions were significantly diminished in the biblical canon, and who was ultimately labeled as a prostitute. My sense is that her relationship with Jesus may have been stronger than that of any of the other disciples, a reality that probably didn't fit in with the narrative being penned by those in power, and whose reputation thus needed to be diminished in order to make the story fit into what was being prioritized by those in power. If you think that these ancient stories don't still sway our current events, think again. Several months ago, Vice President Vance cited an ancient Christian concept known as Ordo Amoris, which means order of love, as justification for the treatment of migrants in this country. Vance argued that his Christianity teaches people to love those closest to them and accused Democrats of caring more about migrants than American citizens. Pope Francis disagreed, telling U.S. Catholic bishops in a letter in February that Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons or groups. And at the time, the person who is now named Pope Leo shared multiple articles on X disputing Vance's position, saying, Jesus does not ask us to rank our love for others. And other cardinals had penned pieces asking, do you not see the suffering of your neighbors? Is your conscience not disturbed? How can we stay quiet? Francis was ultimately speaking of a theology aligned with our UU values of inherent worthiness and interconnection. All are worthy of love. The stories and the beliefs that underpin our worldview have an outsized impact on how we approach our lives. The primary dogma that is espoused by a vast number of Christians today is grounded in concepts that place human outside and above nature, with a God-given right to hold dominion over all. This is a significant difference from a story such as the Sky Woman myth, which honors the creation and partnership with nature of the sacred feminine. One story leads to a set of assumed rights based on our dominant position within the hierarchy, and the other leads to a set of assumed responsibilities based on our interconnectedness to the whole. This faith that we practice here together, Unitarian Universalism, calls us to learn from one another in our responsible searches for truth and meaning. What is our responsibility when we notice foundational assumptions within the shared theology of our society that we believe to be causing harm in the world? First and foremost, always, we must begin by examining our own assumptions. Because of the outsized influence of Christianity on the American story, the tales of Eve and Mary Magdalene form the basis of much of how we have come to define the roles of women in our society. Much of what our liberal faith tradition is wrestling with these days is a redefining of these traditional definitions, which is a process that by default is going to be messy. Traits that have been traditionally assigned a masculine label are not bad. Traits that have been traditionally assigned a feminine label are not bad. And before I proceed, I also want to be clear that masculine and feminine do not necessarily need to be assigned around gender. These words are simply descriptive. Aggressive, passive, dominant, nurturing, emotive, strong, weak, warm, cold. I know plenty of men that display any number of these characteristics, and I know an equal number of women that exhibit the same. And I know dozens of genderqueer folks whose ways of being in the world can sometimes completely defy society's normalized use of words such as these. Each word that we use has a meaning, but it also has a value assigned to it. American society, whether you are aware of it or not, significantly prioritizes traditional masculine ways of being over traditionally feminine ways of being. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're being too emotional. To the victor go the spoils. You are caring too much. The prevailing sentiment is that feelings and emotions typically labeled as feminine are bad or weak or without value. No. Feelings and emotion are both universal human attributes, but they have been assigned negative connotations by our society, so we have not been encouraged to cultivate them, to our very significant detriment. So I ask again, given all of this, what then is our responsibility? I think first and foremost, we need to be willing to consistently challenge any and all assumptions that diminish the qualities that are traditionally labeled as feminine. Far from being useless or weak, emotions, typically associated only with women but present in all of us, can act as a highly attuned compass for our lives if we are willing to honor them when they appear and press them for the lessons they are trying to whisper to us. We need to value those that are willing to sacrifice a part of themselves for the sake of another, rather than accepting the current thinking that seems to say generosity is for suckers and the only way to win is to take as much as you can possibly get. This is not how Earth Mother works. She freely shares her abundance for our benefit, asking only that we take only what we need and leave the rest for others. This is the way of nature. This is the way of the peoples that successfully inhabited this land for tens of thousands of years before peoples with a different set of stories came and temporarily took control through domination. Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her seminal work Braiding Sweetgrass, describes it like this. Creation stories are a source of identity and orientation to the world. They tell us who we are, and we are inevitably shaped by them no matter how distant they may be from our consciousness. One story leads to a generous embrace of the living world, the other to banishment. One woman is our ancestral gardener, a co-creator of the good green world that would be home of her descendants. The other was an exile, just passing through an alien world on the rough road to her real home in heaven. She goes on to say, and then they met, the offspring of Sky Woman and the children of Eve, and the land around us bears the scars of the meeting and the echoes of their stories. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and I can only imagine the conversation between Sky Woman and Eve. Sister, you got the short end of the stick. My personal theology tells me that the most important aspect in nature is balance. It tells me that humans do ourselves collective harm when we allow ourselves to collectively fall out of balance. And my experience of the times I find myself living in, and perhaps many, many of the years and generations that came before, tells me that the sacred energies of masculine and feminine have become significantly tilted toward the masculine half of the equation. On this Mother's Day, let us commit to re-examining our stories. Let us be willing to explore our relationships with the mothers in our lives, reconsidering what our challenges were real and what have been projected unfairly upon them based on inaccurate conceptions that the value of women that play in our world. Let us reclaim the power available to us in our emotions. Sadness, gladness, anger, and fear are all signs our bodies offer to tell us that we are either heading in the direction of safety and prosperity or risk and scarcity. Let us reacquaint ourselves with Mother Earth, remembering to thank her for the abundant gifts she shares and working to take only what we need and little else. In this honoring of the sacred feminine, let us commit to live lives that move us back towards balance and the sustenance of life. And in that process, let us give thanks for the mothers that made our very lives possible, and without whom all that we know and value could not be possible. Thank you to my mothers, the one that birthed me and the other one that raised me. Thank you to every mother in this room, and thank you to all the mothers that have come before, especially those that carried out their difficult roles, shouldering the unnecessary burdens of a society whose stories have subjected them to invisible burdens that they could surely feel with every step that they took. Happy Mother's Day to you all. Our closing words this morning are from Linda Susan Ulrich, entitled For All Mothers. For all the mother and mother figures, the grandmothers, aunts, and extended family members who mother, the soon-to-be mothers, the wish they were mothers, that never wanted to be mothers, the it's complicated mothers, the birth mothers, foster mothers, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, the used-to-be dad mothers, and the more than one mom mothers, the single mothers, separated mothers, stay-at-home mothers, unhoused mothers, the grieving mothers, those who grieve their mothers, and those whose grief is complex, for all the communities that mother, and for all who depend on the great mother, you are held and you are beloved. Amen. Beloveds, it is a beautiful day, and it is a beautiful day to celebrate our mothers. I don't think there's much scheduled for second hour, right? There's not usually there's somebody must have had the bright idea to leave everybody to go take your mom out to lunch or something like that. Make sure you do consider signing up for volunteer opportunities that are still available in the social hall, and just go forth and spread the love. Peace be with you.